In today's lesson, we will be looking at the triangular trade, which is another description of the slave trade. And in doing so, we will be looking at the economic imperatives as to why Britain wanted an empire. There was money to be made. It will also, in introducing slavery, bring in a very subjective topic, which in turn is going to affect the interpretation of the British Empire, and obviously we are working towards some kind of judgment as to whether or not the British Empire was good or bad. We talk about civilization, but the British took part in slavery. We talk about barbarism, but these are the people that we enslaved, certainly up until 1807, before slavery was abolished in the British Empire. So, our knowledge retrieval at the beginning: 4 reasons why Britain wanted an empire, and then 4 colonies that were part of the British Empire. So there are some examples. The 4 reasons why Britain wanted an empire are the ones we looked at last time. We're certainly going to focus on the economy and trade today. 4 countries that were in the British Empire. Obviously the list is considerably larger than that. Think, what is the connection between black Americans and the British Empire? And that, of course, in turn would be slavery. The triangular trade is this journey here, drawn out on the picture, from the slave ports of Bristol and Liverpool, taking the goods of the Industrial Revolution, the manufactured goods, to West Africa, where locals bought them, and in return for these purchases, the money gained by the British was used to purchase slaves. These slaves were taken from West Africa over to the Caribbean and North America, where they would grow sugar, tobacco, molasses, rum, and then that would be shipped back to Britain to be sold in the new cities of Britain, consequently making a huge return on the investment should the journey be undertaken successfully. So, the British Empire then, the connection is that the British slaved. The British did not invent slavery, but the British, despite being latecomers as European slavers, became the most efficient. They also became the first to abolish slavery, which again is something that we need to bear that in mind. 1807, the abolition of slavery. So we recently celebrated the bicentennial of the abolition of slavery within the British Empire. Okay, so triangular trade. Britain had the industrial goods because Britain had the Industrial Revolution, but wanted sugar and tobacco. We never had a sweet tooth before we could get our hands on sugar. And you know the lengths we would go to get sugar. Quite literally, we were prepared to transport and trade in human life. The Americans, the American colonies, had sugar and tobacco, but they needed cheap workers. Both tobacco and sugar require people to harvest them. Africa had the people, but wanted the industrial manufactured goods that came out of Britain. Now, apart from the slaves then, this was a win-win situation. Some background and some context, and there you go, the triangular trade listed in its 3 stages. This section here through the middle is known as the Middle Passage, which we will study a little later in the course. Learning checkpoint: double check what was the triangular trade, what goods were traded. Now we're going to look at the motivation to become involved in slavery in a little bit more detail. What we're going to do is play the part of a Liverpudlian slave trader called Mr. Grab-a-Lot. And Mr. Grab-a-Lot is going to have the accounts of his journey studied in order to figure out the motivation for taking part. So on this particular slide, what you will have are the information relating to each stage of the journey: the first leg from Liverpool to West Africa to the Caribbean, and then the 3rd stage coming back. What we need the students to do is to figure out the income and expenditure at each stage of the journey. Now, in doing that, what they will find out is that on each stage of the journey, there were varying risks involved. So, for example, initially, you had to fill your ship up. Consequently, there was a lot of expenditure. Now, until you got to West Africa and sold those manufactured goods, there was a great risk involved. Once you'd purchased your slaves and filled your ship, you sailed over the Atlantic, sold your slaves, raised the money with which to buy the products from the Caribbean like sugar and tobacco and rum. When those go back to Britain, you sell them again at a profit. The profit of the slave trade evolved the successful completion of each stage of the journey. What we need the students to do is see where that money was made, because trading is based upon people gaining and making money. When they arrive at the end of the journey, they should have made a considerable profit, and in that profit lies the motivation for the involvement in the slave trade. Now, it is not an easy task, and it's certainly one to push the children for perseverance. They can use calculators and they will find this challenging, but they have to methodically work through the task. The first thing I would have the students do is read through the statements on the information sheet and determine whether we are talking about income or expenditure. Is the person making money or spending money? And that will determine which column it goes in, and then work your way through the process. How profitable, therefore, was slavery? We can arrive at a figure in pounds and pence. Today, we are appalled that anyone would want to be associated with slavery, but explain why thousands of businessmen were willing to take part in the triangular trade. And in doing this, we want students to reflect back on the living conditions that existed in Britain during the 18th century. At this time, we are talking about a means of social aspiration, social mobility. If you made money, you could climb and claw your way out of the class of society in which you were born. And I'm afraid that was the motivation, along with a moral belief that people who were not white were not humans in the same way as we would refer to people today. And that made it somehow more acceptable. Next lesson, we will study the middle passage in more detail.